I feel thin, sort of stretched, like butter scraped over too much bread. I need a holiday. A very long holiday. And I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I mean not to.
You know what's weird about Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring? It's technically a good 42 minutes until we get any kind of action besides a brief moment during the prologue. It's 49 minutes until Frodo reaches Bree, 80 minutes until we reach the Council of Elrond where they decide what to do, which structure-wise sounds mad when you put it like that. There's basically an entire movie before we reach the point where our heroes set out with a plan. The thing you normally get around the end of Act 1 doesn't happen until halfway through this film. There are many caveats to the stuff I just said, but the main point is, on paper, this film should be agonisingly slow until we get to, like, Weathertop or to Rivendell or something, and yet it's not slow. That first 40 minutes not only breeze by, but are many people's favourite sequence of the entire Peter Jackson trilogy. What makes it work so well where it could have, in the hands of a lesser director, been incredibly dull? So I've talked about Lord of the Rings a fair bit in the past. I've done in-depth videos breaking down scenes such as the scene of Smeagol finding the ring, of Gandalf meeting Saruman, and the prologue itself. I wanted to take that a bit further and discuss an entire sequence, probably not breaking down every single moment like I did in those videos, but definitely discussing a fair amount because there is a lot to this sequence that is brilliant and I just wanted to kind of talk about it, okay? So let's do that. The perhaps obvious but often forgotten fact in writing is that story doesn't always mean action, and even more so, spending a lot of time setting up for the later adventure doesn't mean you can't have big story elements progressing in their own right and a great deal of tension. Because I think even aside from the plot stuff, there is a more thematic sort of story going on in the background of this Shire sequence. And that is the conflict between this very peaceful, almost innocent world of the Shire and how it sets against this darker, wider world that gradually starts to encroach on the peaceful hobbit life. It's the sort of theme the beginnings of most fantasy stories touch on. A young or slightly naive or innocent or something sort of protagonist living a peaceful existence until a greater danger uproots their life and throws them out into chaos. Normally they have, like, the protagonist's parental figures die because that conveys the theme very quickly and forces the story to progress. Here, Bilbo doesn't die, obviously, which actually makes it feel refreshing when you compare it against many modern stories, but also Peter Jackson doesn't rush things. He takes his time to really explore this general theme of innocence set against experience.
If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been.
And because it's explored properly, it creates a lot of suspense. This is exactly where a prologue can work very well, because we've had this opening prologue to tell us about the ring and Sauron and all the greater danger that lurks out there in Middle-earth. We get this epic grand scale with large sweeping shots of the mountains and Galadriel saying,
"For the time will soon come when hobbits will shape the fortunes of all."
And this sudden contrast here is we go right back down to something very small scale. Frodo sitting under a tree reading a book, something very peaceful. The ominous greys turn into vibrant greens. All of it is a stark visual contrast to tell us, okay, this world of the Shire and of Frodo under that tree is a very innocent world that's about to get shaken up by all this darkness that Galadriel has just told us about. We know that's going to happen, we know it's coming, and you can then tease out our expectations there for a level of suspense. We can sense trouble coming, but we don't know when or how, I suppose, and that's basically what we get here. It starts off very gently, I think, with Gandalf entering the Shire. He, at least to the Hobbits here, symbolises that wider world, that world that's part exciting to children and Frodo, part dangerous and a dark world for which they label Gandalf
A disturber of the peace.
So that's just a very gentle first example of something beyond invading their peaceful world, and I really love the very small example of Frodo asking,
What news of the outside world? Tell me everything.
which for one itself hints Frodo might be more ready for adventure than even he realises yet, but crucially, Gandalf avoids answering this, avoids telling Frodo anything about the wide world, just saying,
Life in the wide world goes on much as it has this past age, full of its own comings and goings.
combined with the visuals we see of the Shire's own comings and goings to focus our attention on that instead. In supposedly answering the question, Gandalf is more just talking about the Shire. It's very subtle, but the way the music comes in and this montage of the Shire life begins as Gandalf says all this, it's like the film itself doesn't want to think about the dangers at large, doesn't want the Shire being infected with all of that, and then the camera cuts back to Gandalf's face.
Scarcely aware of the existence of hobbits, for which I am very thankful.
And that just underpins it. Okay, there is something Gandalf isn't telling us. He doesn't want the wider world and the world of hobbits to collide. He wants to keep them very separate. But we can already sense they're going to collide to some degree at some point. This contrast here just subtly begins to ramp up the tension. Also, as a quick side note, having us travel with Gandalf and Frodo through the Shire, having the set built as a real physical space so that the camera can just easily move through the location on this journey with the wagon, it's absolutely essential to properly make this feel like a real community to us. Tolkien begins the Fellowship of the Ring with a long talk about the culture of hobbits. Peter Jackson achieves something kind of similar in a quick moment through these shots, which are far more than just simple establishing shots. Alongside hearing these are a community with local opinions about Gandalf and about Bilbo and all sorts. Peter Jackson seems to understand the more the Shire feels real to us, the more we will care and the more suspense we'll feel about the idea of the Black Riders coming and everything else. Obviously it's good film-wise for the place to feel real in general anyway, but I think it definitely does add to the suspense that slowly ramps its way up through this scene. And that is a tiny example, I just find it a nice touch, so I wanted to mention it, and it underpins how the idea of the wider world can be both exciting and can bring out mention of fireworks and Bilbo's own longing to explore mountains and things again, and also be the total reverse, the darkness that we later see. More generally though, we have this entire sequence gradually moving from a happy, bright morning to afternoon to the darkness of night by the end. We have this figure who represents the wider world encroaching on the community. We have him at first very reluctant to talk about the wide world until the appearance of the ring forces him to tell the story of Sauron. We have a hobbit on the cusp of adulthood who goes from laughing and joking. I mean, people forget how very carefree Frodo is initially. He goes from that into something fearful and worried by the end of this sequence. We have him and Samwise Gamgee travelling physically further than they've ever been before, and we have a very evil ring at first, not seen, just hinted that it's in the pocket that Bilbo keeps gripping, then we vaguely see it in his hands, then we see it directly, and then the characters talk about it. Then they, including Gandalf, are forced to really accept exactly what this ring is, all of which you can generally describe as the ring just gradually starting to dominate the screen. It slowly takes over all attention, going from this vague thing somewhere in the background of this happy community to just dominating it. And then lastly, we obviously have the more direct example of the ring wraiths straight up invading the Shire, travelling to Bag End, killing hobbits and chasing after Frodo. All of these elements together tell the same story of a peaceful, largely innocent existence being troubled by the darkness of the wider world. It's both the fact he's got these many different elements to coherently work together and be the focus, and also the fact that Peter Jackson takes his time with it, teases it all properly instead of rushing it. That means it gets proper time to create real and genuine suspense. It feels funny to have mentioned all of this, however, without once affirming the point we need to take our time with the Shire, because everything the Shire stands for is exactly what the rest of the trilogy is fighting to preserve. As much as you can loosely talk about the kind of thematic innocence under threat here, it isn't actually innocence. We're not supposed to see Hobbit life as quaint, innocent triviality. We're supposed to see it as everything that's best about life. And we have to feel that for the sake of the rest of the story mattering. This is why they fight. So I want to talk about the contrast of worlds. Really, it's that. It's the best of humanity set against the worst of humanity. So yeah, despite very little happening, despite how slow the plot is here, it all feels suspenseful, both because we can feel this building up, upward trajectory developing through the elements of the film here, but also because thematically we're seeing the start of as big a kind of existential battle as you can imagine playing out through this contrast of worlds, and I think that's masterfully done. Something that could seem somewhat strange about this sequence is that since we've had this prologue to tell us all about the ring, why do we then need to be effectively introduced to it again through first Gandalf and then Frodo discovering what it is? Because Gandalf isn't at first aware Bilbo has the ring. Then when he is, he's wary of this ring but not exactly certain what it is. Then he goes off and researches the One Ring and he comes back, and only once it's been put in the fire and the writing shows up does he know for sure this is the One Ring. When adapting books to films, all directors do need to cut and change a hell of a lot, except in a very few examples. Because not just are books generally much longer, but the pacing can be very different in situations, sometimes even the structure needs altering. Peter Jackson, of course, made some cuts and changes that we might all take issue with, me included, but for the most I think he did a great job. The point I'm driving towards though is that a lesser director would probably have made a change here that have gone, we already know about the ring thanks to the prologue, this film is going to be very long so we need to trim the length where we can in order to speed things up. Why don't we make it that Gandalf knows from the very second he sees Bilbo's ring exactly what this is, it's the One Ring, and then that way we don't need to lose time with him going off to research it, Frodo keeping it safe in the meantime, coming back later on, testing the ring, only then finally telling Frodo what it is and sending him off on the adventure. We can cut all of that and just have Gandalf already know and be able to explain to Frodo. And not only would that be unfaithful to the books, something that seems to be popular to do at the moment, but it would deny us a much smarter way to keep these long scenes feeling fast-paced, because we then get to see an emotional conflict going on in Gandalf as a character. A conflict you could sum up as desperately hoping Bilbo's ring is not the One Ring, fearing the worst whilst hoping otherwise until he is finally forced to accept the truth. It gives us far more time to explore Gandalf's feelings of fear and wariness about the ring, which Peter Jackson smartly, I think, made the main focus of the camera in a lot of this. First, with these close-up shots of him during Bilbo's speech, he goes from a knowing smile that Bilbo is going to do something mischievous to a slight concern, to being completely taken aback at Bilbo's disappearance. And you know, this is the wise, great wizard Gandalf. When we see even him worried, we know as an audience this is something to really worry about. I really like that about Gandalf. You see his fear a lot in both the films and the books. I think too often stories idealise these characters and make them completely fearless, which just then reduces all the tension for us as the audience. But then he's stern about Bilbo leaving the ring, and he's clearly not thinking it's a good thing, but he's not without his composure here yet. Then he gets to touch the ring and gets a zap of Sauron that leaves him troubled, which is a really great shot to see exactly what Gandalf is feeling there, and so is this one. I think it's really essential to emphasise Gandalf's fear. Frodo in the background, Gandalf muttering to himself in the foreground, anxiously smoking, only actually looking away when the ring is shoved uncomfortably close to the camera. So close you can almost feel the frightening temptation of it. Again, uncomfortably close with the envelope as well. It just makes it feel a bit, I don't know, dizzying and uneasy, I guess. They're really good shots, I think. And then Gandalf goes to rush off to research, but not before this equally disconcerting shot.
Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
The way he swoops down from above, you know, all of the camera work here I think reinforces Gandalf's own fear that then completely explodes upon his return to Bag End. He's breaking in the middle of the night to the extent that Frodo at first fears he's been robbed. He's clutching at Frodo from behind, pointing his staff in a direction of sounds, visibly shaken up. He's so on edge here. The speed with which the ring is thrown into the fire, and then that brilliant shot of Gandalf walking away into the foreground, again with Frodo in the background. At first relieved when Frodo can read nothing on the ring before the sudden stab of dread.
There's nothing. Wait.
Then the almost angry, gritted acceptance of the truth. Gandalf has spent all this time fearful, hoping this isn't the One Ring, needing to know for sure, and now the truth is revealed. Only now does he give the semi-exposition dump of the ring to Frodo, now once it's been properly earned through the build-up of emotion. If you just had the semi-exposition dump without this, I think it would really kill the momentum, but it doesn't because there's a build-up to it. Peter Jackson in that sense makes Gandalf's dread the absolute focus of these scenes, before it then flips to Frodo's dread being the focus as Gandalf explains the ring to him.
But he was destroyed. Sauron was destroyed, alright? We put it away. We keep it hidden. We never speak of it again.
The framing here of Frodo rushing off to another room as though trying to move away from the horrible truth, and Gandalf lumbering in behind him like this towering shadow and figure of this truth that he can't run from. You know, Frodo can do nothing but turn back to him again.
No one knows it's here, do they? Do they, Gandalf?
And then both their fears just explode onto screen in the climax of this scene. Frodo realises the Ringwraiths are coming for him. We see them riding into the Shire and killing a hobbit, and he fearfully exclaims,
Take it, Gandalf! Take it!
No, Frodo.
You must take it!
Don't tempt me, Frodo!
Frodo's terror about the danger coming for him, Gandalf's terror about how the ring would corrupt him if he took it. I really don't think people credit Elijah Wood enough for the brilliant job he did as Frodo in this film. The point is though, despite us already knowing exactly what Bilbo's ring is due to the prologue, Peter Jackson gives these characters proper time to discover what the ring is for themselves, to let us see them discovering it and grappling with their feelings about that. The fear of what they're discovering is made the total focus, and that is so engaging to watch. Yeah, it takes more time to do that. Yeah, that might not work in every story or situation, but here I think it actually makes the film far faster paced than cutting all of this out to save time would do. A very small point worth just discussing here is that I think Peter Jackson does a really good job making the ring feel like a character in its own right. Not just a MacGuffin, not just a symbol or kind of allegory of the power and corruption, but like it's like an actual character with a level of Sauron's spirit within it. Which is, of course, how it's meant to be in the books, and Gandalf and others talking about it like some sentient-ish being helps to do that. But I think in film you also need to show it through shots of the ring itself. And that's what they do. We are shown enough magic to the ring to suggest it has some greater sense of power, but also not show us too much that it loses its eerie sense of mystery. As such, we do see small moments with the ring that kind of pique our curiosity, like it shrinking down when Isildur holds it, or how incredibly heavy to the point of not even bouncing it becomes when Bilbo drops it. Obviously the stab of Sauron when Gandalf touches it, and the faint whispering when it's thrown into the fire, or the way it kind of seems to answer Frodo here.
Sauron was destroyed.
That is just such a perfect moment to elevate the frightening power of this little ring, especially when Gandalf and Frodo look so unnerved at hearing it. For The Lord of the Rings to work as a film, I think it entirely relies on the ring itself feeling far more than just a MacGuffin. Right, one final point to end this, which is Bilbo and his relationship with Frodo. Although just to say, I think Ian Holm as Bilbo is 100% my favourite performance in this trilogy of films. I think he gets a relatively short amount of time on screen and yet has to show us a very cheerful, lively, almost show-like side of Bilbo who enjoys being the life of a party and enjoys seeing Gandalf, but that sets against a total restlessness that just gradually becomes increasingly unsettling as the corrupting effects of the ring become more and more apparent to us.
And I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I mean not to.
Needing to show that in a way that doesn't make his character seem like two different people, and also needing to show it in a way that can match with the gradual building up of suspense. It's just such a complex part to pull off with very little screen time, and I cannot fault the performance whatsoever. Anyway, I think a hell of a lot of this sequence hangs on the fact that Frodo and Bilbo never meet here. Not on screen until Rivendell anyway. Gandalf is kind of between the two of them. We meet Frodo at first and we learn he's suspicious of Bilbo being up to something, but Gandalf won't tell him what. And so then when we go to Gandalf meeting Bilbo and we discover Bilbo is planning to leave the Shire and that Gandalf is a bit worried he won't even tell Frodo.
You will tell him, won't you?
Yes.
He's very fond of you.
It makes us feel quite sorry for Frodo, especially with how upbeat and carefree Frodo has seemed to begin with. Bilbo might just up and leave without so much as saying a goodbye to him. And again, you know, these are all aspects of the original story. These are things to credit Tolkien for, you know, but Peter Jackson as well, he has to know not just what to keep in the film, but what to focus the attention on. And he lets things slow a moment in this scene. The camera lingers on Bilbo as he moves to the window. The music comes back in to underpin the moment.
He's very fond of you.
I know. He'd probably come with me if I asked him. I think in his heart, Frodo's still in love with the Shire.
It's an important emotional beat that the film highlights for us.
I feel thin, sort of stretched, like butter scraped over too much bread.
The two characters are both at very different stages of their lives, essentially. The tension here, the interest, the emotion of it, I guess, is soft and subtle, but it is important. It makes it sad when Bilbo's speech seems to derail. Frodo's innocent face turning to confusion, no proper explanation or goodbye beyond Bilbo looking to him in that moment.
Goodbye.
And then a very sad Frodo later bursting into Bag End, finding the ring and realising that Bilbo's gone, that he may never see him again. You know, it's not a heartbreaking thread to the story, but it is a satisfyingly soft sting of sadness. On one side we have Frodo kept in the dark, kinda kept in the background of the film here, unaware of Bilbo's plans, and how sad that then makes his sudden discovery. Set against us seeing all of it from Bilbo's side for the most, his restlessness to leave, his guilt that Frodo might come with him if he was told. Most importantly, the incredible struggle but great feeling of relief Bilbo gets when he finally lets go, not just of the ring, but of this life as a whole. Dropping the ring here very literally removes a heavy weight, and it's only once he's gone is Frodo properly brought into the foreground of the story, no longer kept at a distance from us and the truth. It's sad he never gets a proper goodbye, not quite yet anyway. We have this little emotional arc going on here, alongside this thematic kind of arc of darkness falling over the Shire, or these characters, alongside this little arc of Gandalf and then Frodo's fear, discovery and acceptance of the ring. All of these threads together weave important emotional story through scenes that do lack much action, so that's the point. In the difficult beginning of trying to set up and get your story going, you don't always necessarily need it to explode with action. You don't always necessarily need to keep it very brief, or just rely on chucking in some danger to speed things along and add a bit of urgency. Not to say it can't help to do those things, and in a lot of ways it can, but if you are having story, character, theme, emotion develop through the characters in its own right, then that itself can make it engaging. Which is a very obvious point for me to make, yes, but you do see it forgotten so many times, and I just feel The Fellowship of the Ring is the best example in film I can think of for how even a slow setup to adventure can feel suspenseful and emotional and very satisfying to watch. Seeing as I did talk there about the fear that Gandalf and Frodo have to grapple with though, it's only right I draw attention to the concluding moment to that thread. Gandalf tells Frodo he must stay off the road when he travels.
I can cut across country easily enough.
The music comes in here, and Gandalf looks on Frodo with very touching admiration for this small hobbit.
Hobbits really are amazing creatures. You can learn all that there is to know about their ways in a month, and yet after 100 years, they
can still surprise you.
It's a small moment, but it's a wonderful one to show that fear need not destroy us, and to underpin the affection that Gandalf feels for Frodo, the main theme really, fellowship, the love between companions, and how that can make all the difference against the darkness of the world. How with that even the smallest of people can make a difference. I hope this video wasn't like a little too straightforwardly just explaining what happens in the plot and why I think that's good here. But that is all I'm going to talk about for today, it seems. Let me know what you think, if you liked it, if I missed anything, if I got stuff wrong, if you think I should have done a bit more of an actual deep analysis of this scene. Like the video if you liked it though, subscribe for all my other Lord of the Rings content or other things I've been discussing, like Song of Ice and Fire recently. Support me on Patreon if you want even more videos, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Janice McMahon, Luke Orr, Chichu Kaber, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.